Alright folks, I'm caffeined up and I'm ready to do some cool stuff. So we got two fun sections left to do. One, character portraits, them animating, them making speaking sounds, all that jazz. And then we have the actual text effects. And that is going to be a walk in the park compared to what we just did in that last section. So, you see, I've gone ahead and imported a couple things. First, we're going to do the character portraits, and I have Blue Kid here, which is our player from the RPG series. Very simple 2-frame animation, normal speaking. Another emotional state for Blue Kid, happy state, and sassy Green Kid. So for this system, my little character portrait boxes are going to be 64 by 64 pixels. We're going to leave it that size and put our origin on the top left. This is how I'm doing it in this one, so whenever I'm plugging in numbers and all that stuff, that's why I'm doing what I do. This is very easily adaptable to different styles. Like if you wanted to do like the graphic novel style, like character busts that hang out like above the text box, this will work for all that. You just gotta tweak it a little bit. But anyways, I got a couple of those, and I have two new variants of my text box sprite. So here's the normal one that just animates like this, and it's purple. Got a green one for Green Kid, and this one does a special animation. These are the same size, and they're 9 slices, but they don't actually have to be the same size. You just have to make sure that they actually behave properly like this. Make sure it's activated on if you make a new one. And I got a blue one that's basically just the first one, but recolored, and a couple extra things on the side. So let's open up our object text box. We're gonna need to set some new variables. And not only that, we're actually gonna change one. And we might change a couple by the time we're done with this. But the main one we're going to change is we want to change text_b sprite to be an array, so we can change it whenever we want to. So let's make this textbox sprite 0, and before we set up anything else, let's go into our draw event, and we can control F and look for our text_b underscore SPR. And now we need to set all the versions of just regular text_b underscore SPR and make them arrays. Don't use find and replace because it will replace even these. So just manually find each one and make them an array. And of course, the same with all of the arrays that we're doing around here when we're actually drawing stuff, we want to get the correct page. So don't worry, this won't take a second. I think we only put it in like 4 places because we found the width, we found the height, and we drew it for the back of the text box. And then you can use this to cycle through neither of these two. And yes, this next one, because this is the back of the option box. And that's the only time we referenced just text_b underscore SPR. So we're all square to head back. Now we can just take this because we're about to hop back into our defaults for text. So let's open that with a middle click. And now we're up here and we can do the same thing with this new variable as we did with all those. So let's add that in. And this is again a default. So for the amount of pages we have, it'll default the regular text box to our default thing over here, the purple one. So we set that up. Let's set up another one called speaker sprite. Set every page number on that one. And we will set this to no one, which is a built-in constant that has its own value, which is useful for setting a default to basically mean nothing. And then you can check for that later. So we got those two, and we can do speaker side page number. And you can set these however you want. I'm going to set them to 1 and -1. I set this to 1 as the default, because what makes sense in my mind is the default would be the character is speaking on the left side of the text box, facing the right, like this. And then other characters that aren't your player character or your party or anything like that would be the opposite side, so they would be -1, and then we can use this variable to flip it as well. So if it was -1, this will be facing to the left. So cool. I'll show you how we're going to set these in a bit, but now let's go over to the draw event so we can go ahead and kind of implement some of this stuff. So first what we're going to do is we're going to get the text offsets and make another new variable called portrait x offset for the character portrait, and we want to figure out those values. Doing the same method here, except this time I actually measured this out exactly how I wanted it. I have my grid divided up in 8 by 8 pixels. So for the character portrait, this is a 64 by 64 box. You can see here if I add in my character portrait, it fits perfectly. And this is the exact size of my text box. So now that I have them exactly where I want, I need to find the X offsets for both of these from the left side of the screen. So this one, you can see on the bottom left there, the character portrait offset needs to be 8, and the actual text box now needs to be 80. So let's go above, and we'll set the default to the left side, and you'll see why. So we'll say this is for character on the left. We said we want our text X offset, so the actual text box part, I said 80 for that. And now we want a new variable, portrait X offset, And for this page, we said it was going to be 8. So now let's check what we'd want to do on the right. So I'd move that there, and I'd move this here. So now the text box X offset on the bottom left there is 8, and the character portrait is 216. So we have it defaulted to left, and now we need to check if we need to go to the right. So we'll say character on the right, and so we'll say if speaker side of this page is equal to -1, which we decided meant that it was on the right side, we need to set text X offset to just 8, and we're setting portrait X offset to 216. Very nice. And now we want to say if there's not a speaker sprite specified, then we set it to the center X position, which we already have. We just need to check. So if speaker sprite of the page that we're on is still equal to that no one constant that we set it as, that it defaults as. So if we haven't specified that there's going to be a speaker, then there is none. So we're just going to use this value here to center it. Excellent. First step is done. Now let's actually draw the portraits in their little box. So we can step in just right above this back of the text box line. We will say draw the speaker. So once again, we need to check to make sure that that speaker sprite has actually been specified. So if speaker sprite of our current page that we're on is not equal to no one. So if we have set it as something, then we're going to do this. Now remember, we're using text box image, our own variable, to control the image of the background. So we can just use the sprite index for the actual speaker. If you have a bunch of weird stuff going on, then you can totally make your own variables for it. But we have this free, and I'm not going to use it for anything else. We might as well actually use it. So we can say our sprite index equals the speaker sprite of our page. We can set a variable called underscore speaker X, and that's going to be our text box X plus our portrait. I clearly spelled portrait wrong up here because of my goo brain. Oh yeah, portrait. Well, you can keep it portrait if you want, but I myself am an old-fashioned man, so I fixed that. Okay, back down here. Portrait X offset of our page. Sorry about that. I have been recording for a long time. Okay, so now we have this X to draw our character. We are going to have to adjust something, because if our speaker side of our current page is equal to -1, so if the character needs to be on the right side, we need to adjust this value, because watch this. Because the portrait is in the top left here, we actually want this character to face this way. So if I flip the X and it's in the same position, it goes over here. So we need to add back the length of the sprite itself, which for us would be 64. So for me, I could just write, I could just put speaker X plus equals 64, but depending on what you're doing, that might not work. So you could do speaker X plus equals sprite width, because your sprite has been set to this speaker sprite, and that should take care of everything for you. So now no matter which side it's on, we have that all cool and squared away. Now we just need to draw it. So draw the speaker. We need to draw another little text box. So draw sprite extended, or background, not text box necessarily. I'm going to use the text B sprite of our current page, our text B image. Now for the X, we just need this value right here. We don't need this one. This is for the actual character portrait, because this little background here, this still needs to have the same X scale. Because if we flipped this one, then it would also show up in the wrong position. So we can just do text box X plus portrait X offset of our current page. Go to our text box Y, and just like what we did down here, we'll do the same principle. Again, for me, I could just put 64 divided by text B SPR W, but you could also do sprite width in this case. And same for sprite height divided by text B sprite H. And we're going to do no rotation, C white, and 1. I need to expand this out. So there's the box, and now let's draw the little person talking. So draw sprite extended. We just need to do our sprite index, our image index, the speaker X that we already got, our text box Y. And for our X scale, we're going to do speaker side of whatever page we're on. Y scale of 1, because we don't want our character to be upside down at any point. Or maybe you do, I don't know. But for now, just keep it 1. Rotation 0, color C white, and alpha 1. Now we just need to edit one of our functions to let us plug in whatever we want to. So let's go into our script text box functions. And we are going to add some optional arguments for our script text. I'm going to space all these out so they stay pretty separated. Okay, so there's a couple of ways to do this. You can add an optional argument for each of the individual elements that you have. So first, let me just show you how to make the optional arguments, and then I'd like to demonstrate something. So let's add a parameter here, and let's call this portrait. Now when I make optional arguments, I like to put them in brackets like this, so whenever I click on it, at the bottom, I know that I don't actually have to put that in there for the script to work. So we're not going to put that argument up here. Here's how we're going to do this. Let's open up some space in between here. We're going to keep the defaults at the very top. They always should be at the top. And I'm going to keep the page number adding at the bottom. Text doesn't really matter, but there's no reason for it to not go on top because it's the first argument anyways. So arguments in GameMaker, like most things, start at 0. So this is argument 0. It is the first argument, but it's argument 0, just like how an array would work. This will be argument 0 is what this is. But there's a nice built-in thing called argument count, which can count how many arguments have been passed into something. So I can say if argument count is greater than 1, because this would just be 1, and if I passed in another one, it would be 2, then I can do something with the second argument passed in, which is argument 1. It's easy to keep track of this because you can just say if argument count is greater than 1, then argument 1 is the one that you probably are trying to reference. So if we put this as the portrait, we're saying if argument count is greater than 1, then we can say speaker sprite of our current page, our current page number equals argument 1, which now means we have the option whenever we type in text, the next thing that we type in can be whatever sprite that we want to put in. So we could say like script text, have a character say hey, and then have it show up as green kid. Green kid being sassy. That's what this sprite is. And if we don't have this argument in here, then it will just be the plain old centered purple text box. Now that's pretty cool. However, I'm gonna get rid of this. However, whenever you start adding a lot of things, that can be pretty tiring to have a script full of information constantly for every page. So here's something I like to do. Much like how I like to do the text IDs this way, I want to be able to pass in a character's name and then get a bunch of information based on that. So I'm gonna change this from portrait, and we're just gonna call this character. And now instead of setting speaker sprite here, we're gonna do like what we do in script game text and switch a simple string to do a bunch of stuff. So let's say get character info, and let's switch our argument 1. Tab it out so I can make some cases here. And so let's make the first one case, and we'll say blue kid. Add my colon after the case, make sure I add the break. Very, very important. And if we want the blue kid, the default blue kid, I have it named as sprite player speak. So we can set our speaker sprite of this page number to be sprite player speak. And because we got blue kid talking, we can change our text box sprite of our page number to sprite text box blue, because we want blue kid to have a blue text box. And whenever we add voices, we can put a voice here too, and we can do a bunch of stuff with this. So let's plug this in and see how it does. Let's go back to our script game text. Let's change this first one to hi, I'm blue kid. And now on the bottom there, we have this optional character thing. And so let's just have blue kid say that. So just add that in. Remember, whenever you're using strings like this, it needs to be exactly identical. So I used all lowercase and did an actual space in between the two words. No spaces on either sides of the word. So maybe we'll have blue kid say that. We won't have blue kid say the second thing, and we'll have blue kid ask the question of the ages. And the way we've set up our text box is everything should scoot out of the way and then scoot back and pop back in the middle whenever blue kid's not talking. And whenever blue kid is talking, the options should still line up with everything perfectly. So let's give that a go. Well, looky there. And next one, we're back centered, we're back to purple. We're back to blue kid again. Blue kid is asking the question. We say no because video games are disgusting. And then we go home. And look how simple that is to put all that stuff together now that we're at this stage. Now obviously something we see here is Blue Kid will not shut up whenever she's done talking. So let's do one of my favorite things in the world and go back into the draw event and add one single line of code to fix this forever. So right under setting our sprite, we can say if our drawchar is equal to the text length of our page that we're currently on, which means it is done typing, then we can set our image index back to 0, and that's that. So let's try that out. Look at that. Excellent. So let's add a couple more things to the mix so we can also show off the different speaker side is important and different emotions. So you see I have another Blue Kid sprite here. This one where she's happy. Oh, and I forgot to mention, of course, you need to set your animation speed for your portrait animations just in Game Maker like this, and make sure it's not set to 0, otherwise it won't animate. And if you're using the built-in variables for Game Maker like I am, with sprite index and image index, this is all you have to set. Anyways, so we have her happy over here too, so we can just copy this case, put it right under this one, and we could just say this is Blue Kid happy, and change this to happy, or whatever the sprite you want to use is. And now, if I type in Blue Kid, it'll be the normal sprite, and if I type in Blue Kid happy, it'll be the happy sprite. The cool thing about this is you could do something kind of neat where you could make this same text box, but maybe make a happy version of it. So maybe the default is plain, and maybe the happy version has little bubbles and stuff, or maybe it's a little bit lighter shade of blue. Also, whenever we start adding the voices in, if you have like a happy emotion, you could have a pitched up version of the character's voice sound effect. And maybe if they're angry, you can have a pitched lower one. So that's why I like to do it this way. So anyways, we have another Blue Kid thing, and let's do a Green Kid thing. So I'm gonna separate these out. I'm gonna separate them out by character. So Blue Kid, and everything below here will be Green Kid. So this will be Green Kid, and we want sprite Green Kid Sassy. And so that's kind of Green Kid's default in my mind. But since they are the same sprite just recolored, we can just name this Sassy, because maybe eventually we'll add one where she's just normal and then one where she's happy. Who knows? You do whatever you want. Now we also want to make sure her text box is the green one, so it matches her. And if you wanted to, in Green Kid, you could like build in the speaker side of this page number as being the opposite. But in some games and RPGs, like you might meet NPCs that don't start off as friends, and then they join your party or something like that. So I personally wouldn't build this variable into the separate characters. I would have this one be a separate parameter. Especially for a reason just as simple as if you're coming into a room from the right and you know whenever you meet up with the Green Kid, they're going to be on the left side, you might as well switch where the characters are talking from. So I would just add this as another optional argument. So we'll add side as another optional one. Side the character is on. It's going to be the same thing here. If argument count is greater than 2, then we're going to set argument 2 to something, and that's going to be our speaker side. Alright, so we can go make a little dialogue really quick. Okay, so I've reworked this into a little dialogue. It's got hi, I'm Blue Kid. I want to make Blue Kid look happy. And then Green Kid responds, first with the text here, and we're saying Green Kid, sassy. And then we're putting the -1 on this new argument, so she's on the right side looking left. Then Blue Kid asks a question, non-happy, just regular. Green Kid is still sassy and still on the right side looking to the left. And then you can answer as Blue Kid, and if you say yes, she's very happy. Once again, remember that you are writing these character arguments exactly how you set them up in script text, just like this. Once you make a couple of these, as long as you fit like kind of a formula into your head about how you want to do it, then it should be very easy to remember what's what. So yeah, I guess we're ready to test this out. Okay, Blue Kid, happy on the left. Green Kid, sassy on the right. Question asked, another question asked, and we can answer now. If we say yes, Blue Kid is happy, I'm happy, and once again we go home. Okay, now before we move on to text effects, just do 2 more things. We add some sounds, add some voices, and we want to make the characters take a slight pause whenever they get to punctuation. So when you hit a period or like an ellipses, the text box waits for a second. It's a nice little touch, makes it feel a little bit more like the characters are actually talking. So back to the text box, we'll do the text pauses first. We'll grow into our create event. We can go down here, we'll add 2 similar looking variables, text, pause, timer, we'll set that to 0. And then we have text, pause, time for the amount of time that we're going to pause once we hit a punctuation. You can fiddle around with this. My default is 16. At least the way that I set it on here is 16. And I like it. You can shorten it and you can lengthen it if you want to. So let's go to where we actually type everything. So up here to typing the text. This section of code has looked far too simple for far too long. So first what we need to do is check that we're actually at punctuation. So let's add a variable. We will call this var check char, and that will be the string character at. We're going to check our current page of text, obviously, and we're going to check at our draw char. So checking right where we're typing, and we can say if check char is equal to, we can say a period, then let's start that timer where we need to wait. So we can say text pause timer equals the text pause time. If you want to name these two to be a little bit more different, be my guest, but this is just how it works in my brain. But make sure you are setting the timer to the time here. And also make sure that you set them correctly here. The timer should be 0 and the time should be however many frames you chose. Anyways, so now we've set up the pausing, but what do we do with it? Well, if the pause timer is above 0, like it would be right now, then we don't want to type anything. So we can just add that in. We could say if text pause timer is less than or equal to 0, then we can run all this code here. Which also means if the text pause timer is greater than 0, then we want to count down the timer. So, and we could just add that as an else right here. So if it's 0 or less than 0, we'll continue typing, and if it's not, we won't type, and while we're not typing, we'll count the timer down. So text pause timer minus minus for -1 every frame, and there we go. Now before we test this, I've set this to only work on periods, but you could take this and you could add as many conditions as you want. So you could say if it's a period, or if it's a question mark, or if it's an exclamation point, or even if it's a comma. I think all these are pretty appropriate. If you have characters that use a bunch of exclamation points, you might not want to have exclamation points cause pauses, but that's totally up to you. So let's just see if this works. Yeah! Nice, nice. I had to add this in because you couldn't really tell with the short sentences we had, but pretty good, not bad at all. So back in our text box, and cool thing is, a lot of our sound stuff can kind of piggyback off of that. We just need to set up some more variables. So the first one is we can go into our defaults and set up a new array, and I'm just gonna call it SND for sound, set it up with our page number, same as this, and we can set the default. Now, I have 3 different sounds that I imported over here. Find or make your sounds however you want, but I have a low sound, a high sound, and a mid sound, and they're all kind of similar, but you can definitely tell the difference. So we'll say for the normal text box, we'll just default it to sound, voice, mid for middle. And we can come down here and add whatever voices we want to these characters. We can go ahead and do that. So say sound for the page number for blue kid. We'll say sound, voice, high. I'll do that for both of the blue kids. And then for green kid, just to make sure it's a different one, we'll make it low. Okay, we got those all set up. And let's put a couple more in our create event. Let's label this as sound. And the ones we're going to put here, I'm going to call this sound delay. And we'll say that equals 4. And we'll say sound count. And that will just equal sound delay at startup. Now these are exactly what they sound like. These are going to be delays, so that way my sound effect won't play like every frame and just be a horrible mess. So depending on your sound effect, this can change. And if you have drastically different sound effects, you could even set up this sound delay variable to be an array and set it up in here with sound. And for each different text box sound you have, you can manually set how much delay you actually want, because it can be pretty different for different sound effects. All mine are going to be similar, so I'm not going to do that, but yeah, I mean, I just told you how. So if you need to, you can do that. So back in the draw event, and we're going to go back to the typing effect. We want the sounds to play whenever the box is actually typing. So we only want to play it in between here in this, as long as the text pause timer is less than or equal to 0. That means it's typing, so that means sounds can happen. And something we may or may not want to do is triggering a sound on our punctuations. But either way, even if you do want there to be sounds on your punctuations, at first you're going to want to do it like this. So let's only trigger our sounds whenever we're actually typing and whenever there's not a punctuation. So we can just use an else here. So we will say else, or I'll separate this out to be a little bit better, a little bit more obvious. So now we're going to do the typing sound. We'll set it up like this. So if our sound count is less than our sound delay, then we want to add to sound count. So sound count plus plus. And if not, if it's greater than our sound delay or equal to it, then we'll reset sound count to 0 and we will play our sound. So audio, play sound. We'll do the sound of the page that we're currently on. Priority is just what precedence certain sound effects take over other ones. I just set it to like 8, and then you do not want this to loop because we are already manually triggering it every 4 frames while we're typing on our own. If you have a very short sound effect, then having it loop will be a nightmare, and they'll stack on top of each other. So let's try that out. And this works. And she's got the lower voice. Alright. So depending on how you feel about it, it can be a little awkward to not have the punctuations make a sound, because I think of it more as like a typing sound. These kind of text boxes are a weird sort of in-between where it's typing, but also you still want it to feel like a person speaking. But for me, I like it to actually trigger on these. So now that these are actually separated out, what's great is I can just copy this and paste it in here. And so now no matter what, once we hit a punctuation and a pause, it will trigger that sound. So let's try that out. Nice. And you might have noticed with short words, it can be a little bit weird. And what I actually have in my file over here is one more check, and I say if not audio is playing. So if that sound is not playing, sound page, then I trigger it. And that can smooth it out just a little tiny bit. I think that's pretty good. I like that. So I have very short sound effects, so that works really well for this. If you have longer sound effects, it might sound a little bit different. You might just want to try some different stuff. One thing you might want to try is every time you trigger this sound effect, before you trigger it, you can actually call audio stop sound. So you can have the sound effect interrupt itself, and so they won't overlap. In some instances, that can sound cool, and I can think of some games that have done that where it sounds nice. I think it's really a case-to-case thing. But now we have the characters talking and animating and pausing with sentences, talking back and forth. One's on the left side, one's on the right side. And so that means we only got one thing left: the visual effects for the text itself.